Ever notice how, like, some people totally don't even flinch when their partner's chatting someone up, but others, you can practically see the steam coming out their ears?
Oh, absolutely.
It's like we all have different levels of, I don't know, sensitivity maybe,
Yeah.
when it comes to that green-eyed monster, you know? And you know what? There's a reason for that. Today, we're diving deep into this article called Jealousy in Relationships, a deeper dive into its roots and how to overcome it.
Yeah, and this isn't just the same old get over it stuff,
Yeah.
This actually digs into like the psychology behind it, going way back to childhood even.
Okay, so let's unpack that. The article talks about these things called attachment styles. What are those and how do they play into adult relationships and jealousy specifically?
So, think about a baby, right? They're learning whether they can count on their caregivers for comfort, for security, that kind of thing. Attachment styles are basically those patterns we develop early on that kind of stick with us, shaping how we approach relationships later in life. The article really focuses on two: anxious and avoidant attachment. So someone with an anxious attachment style might always be worried about their partner leaving, becoming kind of clingy, maybe suspicious. They need that constant reassurance, often because of how caregiving was or wasn't consistent back in the day.
So that's like the people always checking their partner's phone, that kind of thing.
Exactly. On the flip side, you've got the avoidant attachment style. This can look like emotional withdrawal, difficulty expressing affection, things like that. Almost like they're trying to protect themselves from getting hurt by just keeping a distance. This often comes from early experiences where those emotional needs weren't met consistently, so they learn to kind of shut them down.
Interesting. So it's not always the really obvious, in-your-face jealousy that's the most telling, huh? And the article is saying these childhood things, they can really impact us even as adults.
They can, yeah. That's why it's so important to understand where these patterns come from. Like, the article gives an example. Someone with an anxious attachment style might totally freak out if their partner spends a lot of time with friends. But it's not really about the friends. It's that deeper fear of being abandoned bubbling back up.
Makes a lot of sense when you put it that way. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, right? The article talks about addressing these attachment styles. But before we get into that, there's this whole other thing. Projection. What's your take on that?
Projection is wild, right?
Yeah.
It's basically when we take our own baggage, our own insecurities and all that, and we kind of unconsciously put it onto our partner.
So instead of looking inward, we're pointing the finger.
Exactly. There's this example in the article, really insightful. Imagine someone who's cheated in the past, right? They might be super suspicious of their current partner, even if there's zero reason to be. They're projecting their own past actions onto this new person.
Oof. Yeah, that's a tough one. How do you even begin to unpack that kind of thing?
That's where the self-awareness piece comes in and the emotional intelligence the article talks about. It's not about erasing your past. It's more like learning to spot how it might be messing with you in the present in your relationships.
That saying, awareness is the first step,
Wow.
right? Can't change what you don't acknowledge. So how do we build that emotional intelligence, especially around something like jealousy that's so loaded?
They break emotional intelligence, or EQ, down into three parts in the article, and they all matter here: self-awareness, self-regulation, and empathy. We've touched on self-awareness. It's like knowing what your triggers are, what sets you off. Could be people, situations, even just thoughts, that bring on the jealousy.
Okay, so say you figure out a trigger. Like, you always get anxious when your partner hangs out with this one particular friend. What then? Just avoid that friend forever. Well, that's where the self-regulation comes in. It's not about controlling the situation or other people. It's about you managing your own reaction. So instead of, I don't know, firing off a passive-aggressive text or stewing in anger, self-regulation could be taking deep breaths, going for a walk, journaling about it, choosing a different way to respond.
So it's like hitting the pause button before you react. Easier said than done, but I get how powerful that could be. Absolutely, yeah. And the article makes it clear this takes practice. But over time, you can actually rewire how your brain reacts to these triggers. And then there's empathy, which is about stepping outside yourself and trying to see things from your partner's side of the fence.
Yeah.
Yeah, like instead of just assuming the worst, empathy is about asking, well, what might they be thinking? What are they feeling? The article even suggests, try this. Imagine you're seeing it all from their point of view, through their eyes. Would you be threatened by the same stuff?
That's a really cool way to look at it. It's like, instead of getting stuck in your own head, you're choosing to see it differently, But the article also says sometimes, even when you're trying your best, those jealous feelings, they can cause problems, right? So then what? How do you fix things, rebuild trust after things get a little messy?
That's where communication comes in, and boundaries, which the article's big on. Being open and honest about what happened, what triggered it, and how to move on in a way that feels safe for both people.
This reminds me of this time I was at this networking thing, hadn't been in that scene for ages, and I'm chatting with this potential client, totally above board, all professional. And out of nowhere, I feel this tap on my shoulder. It's my partner at the time, and let's just say, not happy. Looking back, I hadn't really explained how important this event was to me, so to them I was just, I don't know, flirting up a storm or something.
And that lack of communication can really escalate things, huh? The article talks about how jealousy feeds on assumptions, on misinterpretations.
Totally. If I'd just taken 2 minutes to say, hey, this is the deal, it would have saved so much awkwardness. Makes me think about that self-awareness thing again. Like, if I'd been more tuned into their insecurities at that moment, maybe I would have done things differently.
You got it. Sometimes just a little heads up, little talking can prevent a whole lot of drama. The article even talks about like having regular check-ins with your partner. How are you feeling? Especially if jealousy's been an issue before.
Like a relationship temperature check.
Exactly. And that goes hand in hand with setting boundaries, which the article also gets into.
Okay, so boundaries. Let's talk about that. What are some examples, specifically when you're dealing with jealousy in relationships?
So boundaries are about drawing those lines in the sand, what's okay, what's not okay, in the context of your relationship, right? And it's got to be something you both agree on, not just one person dictating to the other. Like if social media stuff is a trigger, maybe you agree to be more mindful of what you post or like or comment on, stuff like that.
So it's not about controlling each other online. It's about respecting each other's, I don't know, sensitivities, vulnerabilities, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Another one is, say, spending time with friends of the opposite sex. Doesn't mean you can never see them. It's more about finding that balance that you're both comfortable with.
Which might be totally different for every couple, right? There's no one right answer.
For sure. The article's big on that, finding what works for your relationship, your dynamic, and that takes communication and being willing to compromise sometimes.
So true. Okay, so we've talked about how childhood stuff can affect us, the whole projection thing, the importance of emotional intelligence, building that up. We talked about communication, boundaries, especially when things get bumpy. But how do you actually DO all that? How do you go from like understanding it in your head to actually changing your behavior?
That's the million-dollar question, right? Putting it all into practice. And the article has some really practical tips. One of the biggest ones is try to see jealousy as information, not something to be ashamed of or try to ignore.
So instead of, ugh, I'm so jealous, it's more like, what's this feeling telling me? What need isn't being met right now?
Exactly. That shift in perspective can be huge. Instead of letting jealousy run the show, you use it as a chance to grow on your own and as a couple.
It's like instead of it being the enemy, jealousy can be this like unexpected guide, right? Pointing you towards something that needs attention.
Totally. The article even talks about this exercise. When you feel that jealousy coming on, write it down, what you're feeling, and then try to go deeper. You know, is it insecurity? Is there a need for more reassurance, more quality time, that kind of thing? Journaling can be really eye-opening.
Yeah, it's like getting curious about your emotions, not beating yourself up for having them.
Exactly. That self-compassion thing, it's huge. Because let's be real, none of us are perfect, right? There can be times you fall back into old habits, react in ways you wish you hadn't. It's about being kind to yourself in those moments and learning from them.
Totally. It's like any skill, it takes time, you got to practice. And speaking of practice, the article's big on communication throughout this whole process. So what does that look like? How do you actually talk to your partner about this stuff, which can be kind of sensitive, right?
They talk about approaching it from a place of vulnerability and empathy,
Yeah.
using I statements instead of blaming. So instead of, you always make me jealous when you do X, it's more like, hey, I'm feeling kind of insecure right now. Can we talk about it?
It's like inviting them into the conversation, not putting them on the spot.
Yeah, exactly. And when they're sharing their feelings, really listen, try to validate what you're saying, see it from their side, even if you don't agree with it 100%. It's about creating that safe space for them to open up.
Totally makes sense. It's not about winning the argument. It's about finding a solution together.
And sometimes that solution might mean getting some outside help, like couples therapy. The article mentions that. There's no shame in asking for help, especially with something as complex as jealousy. A therapist can be like that neutral third party helping you both navigate it, communicate better.
Like having a relationship coach in your corner.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, Jealousy, as much as it can sting, it doesn't have to be a relationship killer. It can actually be this opportunity to grow closer, understand each other better, and come out stronger on the other side.
This whole deep dive has been amazing, so much to think about. For a listener out there maybe struggling with this right now, what's the one thing you hope they take away from all this?
If they remember just one thing, I hope it's this. Jealousy, it's normal. It's a human emotion. It doesn't mean you're a bad person, and it doesn't mean your relationship is doomed. When you understand where it comes from, you build up that emotional intelligence, and you make open communication a priority, you can take jealousy from something that tears you apart to something that actually brings you closer.
So well said. And hey, listener, a little self-compassion goes a long way, okay? Be patient with yourself. This stuff takes time, and you're not alone in this. Just because you feel jealous doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It just means you're human. Until next time, keep exploring, keep those conversations going, and keep diving deep.